All righty, it is time for episode 152 of the Red Rain podcast. Here is your host, Walter Mitchell.
Thank you, Kyle Little Rock Ledbetter. And thank you, Cardinal fans, for tuning in to today's special show with Brett Kollmann, um, our great friend and loyal friend who's been supporting us for several years now. And we had him on earlier before the draft. He said, "Let's talk after the draft and see what everything looks like." But in the interim, after, I don't know if you've seen the bootleg football preview of the 2024 Arizona Cardinals. It's must see video on YouTube. You can jump on there anytime if you haven't seen it yet. It's an hour and some odd hour and 11 minutes of just comprehensive, unbelievable inside look at the organization from top to bottom. And Brett and EJ Snyder start off the podcast by saying, "We think the Cardinals are going to be sneaky good this year." So, Brett, welcome back. And please elaborate on that for us.
But thank you for having me for one. And I think they are going to be sneaky good. The BJ Ojulari injury hurts a lot because I think he's going to be a big piece of that. But, if you're looking at what Monty's built in the last 2 years with all his wheeling and dealing, he greatly improved the trenches, which was a huge weakness a couple of years ago. They just did not have NFL quality trench play on either side of the ball. It's not fully fixed yet, but it's pretty darn close. They've made some really good moves on both the offensive and defensive fronts the last couple of years. You got your alpha receiver that they've been missing since probably prime Larry Fitz. And even, the couple of years they had DeAndre there, I still think that Marvin's got more juice than even DeAndre had when he first got there. So this is the best receiver the organization has had in quite some time. Kyler is back healthy, more than a full year removed from the ACL. I like their coaching staff. They did a lot with a little last year. And overall, it just feels like, the adults are in charge in this organization. And that is a breath of fresh air in Arizona. It for the first time since probably like the prime Arians years, it feels like, this organization knows what it's doing. It has a plan. It has an identity. And you can just kind of see how they're going to play football just based on who's on the roster.
Yeah. What was fascinating to me was kind of the curiosity that you have about Kyler with Petzing in year two. What are your thoughts about that? We know the Cardinals were run heavy last year and were very successful at it. 5 yards per carry, top 5 rushing offense. But they're waiting all the while to get Kyler back for the last 8 games, and then they started to peak a little bit towards the end of the season. And but this year, with the addition of Marvin Harrison Jr., obviously, and some other skill players, Zay Jones added in there, and Tip Reiman at tight end to go with Elijah Higgins, and of course Trey McBride, or budding superstar tight end. What do you think is going to happen to the offense this year? Will it be different than what we saw last year?
I think it'll be pretty similar, honestly, in terms of personnel usage. I think they're going to live in 12 personnel a lot again this year, except when you have, Tip Reiman coming in, who's one of the better blocking tight ends in this class. Not that he's a slouch as a receiver, but I think that's his calling card as being like a true wide tight end. And, Trey McBride is a great, first, second, and third down tight end in the sense that he blocks his ass off too and is a great receiving threat. So they're going to live in 12 personnel with probably Tip Reiman competing for that Y tight end spot so that they have the freedom to move Trey McBride around. He can spend some time as a big slot. He can spend some time as an H-back, or if they want to do all their wing look stuff, they can just put Reiman and McBride right next to each other. And then you're going to have two receivers on the field. Obviously, Marvin's going to be one of them. I would have to assume there's going to be a pretty heavy competition for the other spot. And it's just based on the types of plays they want to run. They could probably just rotate different guys in, whether they want it to be Wilson or Dortch or whoever. But I would say personnel grouping overall is going to be similar. They're just going to be better at it because they got better guys on the field at a couple positions. And I still think it's going to be just as effective. I still expect a top 10 run game. But when they gotta sit back and throw the ball, you have Kyler Murray healthy and Marvin Harrison fresh. Like, I can't imagine that's a downgrade from what they had last year this time. I'm pretty excited about it because sometimes simplicity works if you got good guys on the field.
Right. So yeah, and there's depth at running back now with the addition of Trey Benson. What's your take on Benson? What did you like him coming out of FSU?
I loved him coming out. I think he's going to be, kind of the mix between him and Connor is going to be interesting because I think Benson's going to be, the kind of their explosive threat in between the 20s. He's a great receiver. He has unreal speed, and not just speed in the first 10 to 20 yards, but speed past 20 yards. Like,
Right.
you could literally see him, get from second to third gear, and then he's got a fourth gear on top of that, which for a guy his size is not common. It's kind of interesting how he had the same rate of explosive runs as getting tackled for a loss at Florida State, but that's just because they ran counter literally a third of the time with him, which is like an all or nothing type run. But they did it because half the time he was going to take it for 30 yards.
Yeah.
And I kind of expect the Cardinals to do that a lot with him too, of like, hey, if we're going to try to get an explosive play on the ground, he's going to be the one who's going to give it to us. And then if we're in short yardage or when we're in the red zone, James Conner's the closer. So
Right.
if I'm going to try to find a comparison for it, Cardinals fans, Montgomery and Gibbs in Detroit last year, similar kind of mix where Gibbs was the explosive threat. You get inside the 10-yard line, it's Montgomery territory. Same thing here. Benson's the explosive guy. Connor's the closer.
Nice. I like that comparison a lot. Of course, we've been kind of trying to emulate the Lions. Of course, we have Dave Sears, former director of scouting in Detroit, and I think he's brought a lot to the table for us in the draft, and trying to piece together this offensive line. Before I get to the offensive line, I'm just fascinated to know. I thought it was a great point that you and EJ Snyder brought up about the Cardinals' lack of motion. Once Kyler got there, basically was zero. Now suddenly in training camp, we're seeing signs that may not be the case this year. We're seeing short motions, longer motions, etc. What do you think? You made a great point about it on your podcast. Tell us, what do you think the Cardinals should do motion-wise, particularly since they've got these versatile tight ends too?
I think they should do whatever Kyler is comfortable with, right? If he's comfortable with a lot of motion, great, use it. If he wants a more static picture so that safeties aren't rotating all over, during his cadence and he's losing track of stuff, then don't do it. And there's no right answer. Like, it's not just, motion equals good. Like, there are some quarterbacks that are on record saying that they're better players with a static picture.
Right.
So, and I think it's on Petzing and Kyler to get together and be like, hey, what works and what doesn't work for us. And I think that's what camp is for, is you try it out, and if he's not feeling it, you go back to what you did last year, keep everything static and just go out and go win. That's why you got Marvin in the first place, right? Because if you want him to just be a static receiver as an X, like we had DeAndre Hopkins there, sitting out there on the left side all day long, just boxing people. If you want him to do that, he can do that. So that's what camp is for, is you just figure out what players are comfortable with so that you can get ready over these 3 preseason games for week 1.
Yeah. Yeah, I was hoping they'd incorporate, I mean, the thought of McBride and Reiman going in motions, both in the running game and the passing game, is particularly exciting to me. But and I don't see why it should be that hard to do. And you made a really fascinating comparison, I thought, on the bootleg preview, when you likened Reiman to Juszczyk, the fullback, H-back of the 49ers. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
It's hard to find guys who are that kind of Swiss Army knife, right? Where they're just as good of a blocker in space as they are when they're in a phone booth with their hand in the dirt, because it's 2 different skill sets. It's one thing if you can, get your hands inside the chest of an outside linebacker, like a stand-up outside linebacker, like a Rashawn Gary, right, who's on the line of scrimmage, get your hands inside, torque him to where you need to torque him, get vertical displacement off the ball against a 270-pound guy. It's one thing to be able to do that, and it's another to be able to do what I think Trey McBride is really good at, which is being used as a puller or as an insert blocker and picking off a 215-pound linebacker or a 200-pound safety in space. 2 very different skill sets. So if you have somebody who could do both, and Kyle Juszczyk can do both, they're worth a weight in gold. So it's not an easy thing to find. Ideally, the Cardinals want to have 2 of them, and we'll find out this year if they do.
Right. Yeah. That was fascinating, and makes the offense so much more diverse. And that was something that, I mean, the minute Bruce Arians arrived, they traded away Anthony Sherman,
Yeah.
and got rid of the fullback. And Cliff at times ran ISOs with a, sort of fullback du jour, like he'd take a Max Garcia and put him in the backfield and, try to ISO on a linebacker. But it was
300-pound fullback. Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. So having a, versatile tight ends like this is so exciting to me, because it's something we have not taken advantage of while the rest of the league has. So catching up with the Joneses maybe on that one. But so as I go through the line, we'd love to have your take on each one of the guys who figures to be prominent in this spot. So I'm gonna throw 5 names at you, and I know that you know them well, and could help Cardinal fans understand whether you think they're good or not. Paris Johnson Jr. at left tackle.
I'm all about it. I think he's a great athlete, super high upside. I was all in favor of the pick last year just because they really desperately needed offensive line help, let alone a guy who can play like 4 different spots. So I'm high on Paris Johnson Jr. Again, it'll take a little bit of time, I think, for him to settle in a little bit, but by the end of September, he should be fine.
Excellent. Isaiah Adams, rookie, left guard.
This one was kind of surprising to me because I thought he was going to compete for the swing guard spot, and all of a sudden you're seeing, he might just outright be the left guard. I'll be honest, I was not crazy high on him as a prospect, but sometimes, especially you see with offensive linemen,
right?
The more I've gotten to know offensive line prospects, the more I realize that there's just not a lot of good offensive line coaches at the collegiate level, and a lot of them are a lot more talented or a lot better than maybe what the college tape showed their potential to be. All of a sudden, they go to the NFL, they get better coaching, and then they end up being really darn good. He might just be another one of those. But if he's coming out there and he's winning the left guard spot outright, like, more power to him. I think that's better than I thought he would do as a rookie.
Yeah, I think he's in the mix. John Gaines, the second, coming off a season-ending knee injury last year. He's been playing pretty well there. And so we got some youth going on there in a position that hasn't been solidified since Justin Pugh left. Center Hjalte Froholt.
I've always been kind of a Froholt guy myself. So I'm really excited for this. I think he's a good player. God, they got him from Cleveland. It was a year ago, right? Like last offseason, I think is when they brought him in, right?
Yeah.
And that was back when Cleveland had like 4 good centers on the roster, and they're like, we gotta, But I've always liked him a lot. I think I don't think he's an upper tier starter at center, but I think you could do a lot worse. I put him in, trying to think of like that like Brian Allen category, right? Where it's like he's not the reason you lose. He's also not like a superstar that's the reason you win, like a Tyler Linderbaum or a Creed Humphrey, but he's rock solid.
Yeah. Yeah, I think he's winning over the fans. Very physical. Most physical center I've seen from the Cardinals, going way back to maybe Lyle Senline.
He does like to fight.
Yeah. Oh man, I love him on the second level. He's like when he gets up downhill on linebackers and safeties, look out.
Yeah.
He usually lands the punches. So a lot of guys miss, but this guy has a bullseye factor to him. But and then perhaps our best offensive lineman right now, right guard Will Hernandez.
Yeah, he's the rock, right? He's the one that you knew that he wasn't going to switch spots. Like they weren't going to throw him at left. It's like we already know he's great on the right side. Let's leave him there. He is the rock around which this world turns. Speaking of extremely physical, Will Hernandez has always been kind of a human coke machine. I think when they do their pin and pull schemes, he's always somebody who I think has set the table really well in terms of washing guys down. And creating room for pullers to pull without getting, tripped up or anything like that. I think his feet have gotten better on outside zone over the years too. He used to really not be good at outside zone. He's a lot better at it now.
Right.
But I think he's a very, very good right guard. I can't remember how many years left he has on his contract. I'm curious to see how they handle that because the guard market has exploded over the last 2 years.
Yep.
So he might be in line to make a lot of money. I don't know.
Well, I wrote a piece a while back, a couple weeks ago, where I was hoping they would extend Fro and Will now rather than later, because they're both in the last year of their contracts. And
keep in mind, Trey Smith is probably going to get $23 million a year next year. So,
oh my God, no!
So you might as well do it now.
See, yeah. My thought was throw the guaranteed money out there for him, give him some security, and hopefully not at 23 mil. But hey, it's good for the guards in the NFL that they're getting their just desserts these days because they've deserved it all along, and the tackles have been gobbling up most of the money, but now the focus on the interior of the lines has become very appealing, and guys like Aaron Donald had something to do with that.
Yeah. If they're making $30 million a year, you need somebody to stop them.
You need somebody 23 million to take on a guy like that. So now your favorite guy at right tackle, Jonah Williams.
Oh man, this is the one, and I love Monty. I think he's done a great job so far. This is the one I don't get. I really don't get the Jonah Williams pickup. He gave up 8 sacks last year, 10 quarterback hits, 46 pressures. And that was an up year for him compared to a couple even worse years in Cincinnati. He's not a good pass protector. He's just not. And I know there was debate about should they do Joe Alt, should they do Marvin, and then the Jonah Williams edition kind of showed you like, okay, we're going to address tackle and free agency and then do Marvin in the draft. But I'll be honest, the reason why I still consider Joe Alt a possibility was because under no circumstances do I want Jonah Williams to be my starting right tackle.
Okay.
I just don't want it. And it's like the one area on the team where I'm like, good God, please no. But other than that, the other 10 guys on the field, I love it.
Yeah. Interesting on Hard Knocks for the Giants came out in one of their episodes like 10 days ago that the Cardinals were a finalist for Jermaine Illuminor, the right tackle that came from the Raiders, and they had a segment with Joe Schoen, who was on the phone with Elu's agent, who said, "Look, if you had $1 million, you're going to get the deal over the Cardinals." And it was really only, it's like a 2-year, 14 mil contract. You think the Cardinals may have missed the boat on that one?
Yeah, I definitely would have done Illuminor. He gave up, I want to say it's like an average of 2 less pressures per game than Jonah Williams. He had a much better pressure allowed percentage, gave up less sacks, less quarterback hits. He was just better. So that would have been the signing that I would have vastly preferred, but we're here now.
Yeah, we're here now. Now, curious to know, we drafted the right tackle from Texas, Christian Jones, on day 3. Do you know anything about him?
It's funny. He's a guy, when you watch him on tape, you're like, I don't know how this works. But then you look at all the stats and everything like that. It's like, by God, from an analytics perspective, he was one of the 7 to 8 most efficient tackles in all of college football last year, in terms of pressure allowed percentage, in terms of pressures given up. I mean, he was like less than 3% pressure allowed, which is half of Jonah Williams last year, just to put in perspective. And the tape was, it looks like he's fighting for dear life out there, but he's winning the fight. So it's like, I don't know, man. It kind of works. We'll see.
I liked him at the Senior Bowl. I thought he repped well in the one-on-ones, and I kind of penciled him into a few of my mocks. And I was surprised to see him last. I think it was to pick 161. I was happy to see he was still on the board. Might be a guy who maybe ends up being a swing tackle for us, but maybe he takes to our system, and at least we have a young guy behind Jonah for the time being, anyway. So, how much gas do you think is left in James Conner's tank?
I mean, I gave up 2 years ago, in terms of, he's like Derrick Henry, right? It's like every year everybody's waiting for the fall off to come, and it just never happens. So at this point, I'm just enjoying the ride. I'm just enjoying watching him play, because he shouldn't still be this good. If you're looking at the mileage, even going back to college and the injuries, the age, like, he shouldn't still be this good, but he is. So I'm just enjoying it at this point. Like, I'm done waiting for the fall off. It'll happen when it happens, but I'm just, until further notice, he's good.
Okay. Do you believe in the Dortch?
Oh, I'm a huge member of the Dorcher Chamber. And I really hope that the Cardinals give him his own fan section out there. He's awesome, man. He's the reason why they traded away Rondale, right? Because they're like, well, he's not as good as Rondale, and he plays the same role as Rondale, and we're never going to play Rondale over him, so let's trade Rondale. He's great. Like, when they go into their 11 personnel stuff, he'll be in the slot for them. Great route runner, super tough. There's a lot to love with him.
Our motto for the show was always carry the Dorch, but I think I like the Dorcher Chamber more than carry the Dorch. That's pretty good.
That's gonna stick now, man. Oh, I love that. What about Michael Wilson?
I'm curious to see if he wins that Z spot across from Marvin. As far as talent goes, he probably should on paper, but like you alluded to, this team is sneaky deep at receiver because he's competing with Zay Jones and Zach Pascal and Chris Moore there. Um, but he's got all the opportunity in the world to win that job. And if you're looking at a trio of Marvin, Michael Wilson, and Greg Dortch, I mean, God, I was just at Chargers camp yesterday. They would kill for that.
Right.
So
Yeah.
it's pretty good.
Yes. Um, he made quite a sacrifice this past week. His wife's competing in the Olympics, and he just said he's not a veteran yet. He's in year two, trying to solidify his spot on the team. Very humbly said he thought it was best for him to stay in camp, and he's been really lighting it up in camp. Caught a bomb off of Kyler in the scrimmage the other day, and uh, he's got the want to, and if he can stay healthy, I think he'll be a tremendous asset. He's also pretty strong after the catch, so and his route running is pretty dang good as it was coming in from his college days. So we're hopeful about him. Now, for Cardinal fans, Brett has a great couple of videos on guys that people rarely talk about in the NFL, the most underrated five defensive players, which, by the way, he included my favorite, Andrew Van Ginkel. I was so, after having talked about him a lot lately, it was so cool to see him on Brett's list. That came as a surprise. And then the one he has up there now about the five offensive players. Brett, tell us which Cardinal you have on there.
So I put Trey McBride because I'm still a little bit annoyed that he didn't make the Pro Bowl.
Yeah.
I thought he deserved that. I think it just comes down to national exposure, right? The Cardinals weren't on national TV a lot last year. Actually, I don't even know if they had any national games. Did they? They might not have. So pretty much the only people that were paying attention to Trey McBride were people that are paid to watch every NFL game, like me, because I cover it, or people that play a lot of fantasy football because Trey McBride was super productive. But if you're actually watching Cardinals games, which I know a lot of national media doesn't, but they should this year. But if you're actually watching Cardinals games, this is one of the most complete tight ends in the NFL. He can line up as a true Y. He can line up as an H-back. Like I said before, you put him as a big slot. You put him outside. He attacks all three levels of the field. They were throwing him seam balls deep down the field last year, back shoulder fades that he had to adjust to. He was fighting through traffic over the middle of the field. They threw him a bunch of screens. There was one where he took a screen. It was like a middle screen. Then he jumped over a guy to get an extra 8-9 yards.
Play.
And he can also block. He's not a Gronk level blocker, but as far as that skill set we talked about earlier, pulling in space, picking off linebackers and DBs on out in space, which is a hard thing for a lot of guys. He's really good at that. So he's a complete tight end, and no disrespect to Jake Ferguson at all, but I thought McBride was the better player last year, and I would have hoped that he made the Pro Bowl, but Cowboys are on TV every week.
Yeah, weirdly, in a number of the preseason top 10 lists that come out, he's not even on people's top 10.
Just odd to me because he's going as like the TE3 in fantasy football. So it's like, okay, we all acknowledge he's productive, but he's not a top 10 tight end.
We don't get it either. The only thing I can think of is maybe people think his numbers will be down because Marvin Harrison Jr. is going to get probably the most targets, and McBride might not get. I think there's plenty of targets for both of them, and Kyler has a special chemistry going with McBride. In places on the field that Kyler hasn't been as consistent as he was with McBride last year, like up the seams, on crossers, and corner routes. So This is really exciting, and I hope that they keep McBride as kind of the go-to clutch receiver on third downs, because that was working really well for us. Like in the Steelers game where we won at Heinz Field, McBride was and Kyler to McBride was a thing that day. I mean, it was really special, especially in tight situations like 3rd and 7, converting, and even on 3rd and goal from the 7, they scored a TD on a nice little split the zone toss. It was thrown a little high that McBride brought in. He is, plus talk about the want to. McBride is really locked in, and he's a baller. And I love the way you described him, because he does stick his nose in there as a blocker, and does everything you want him to try to do to win. So just a combination of having McBride and Tip Reiman as blockers, and then Elijah Higgins really came on a little bit, Brett. The big kid is a receiver for us. You got to take on him.
He's one of those guys where it's like, I'm not really sure what he is, right? Because he's built like both. He's 235. I don't know if he plays at 235, but he's listed at 235. Right. Runs like a deer. Kind of reminds me of Evan Ingram a little bit.
Yeah.
So it's like they use him like a receiver, but he's listed as a tight end, but they're never going to put him on the field to block like a tight end because they got McBride and Reiman, right?
Right.
So it's like when he's on the field, it's like, yeah, technically it's 13 personnel, but not really, because he's going to be in the slot. But he's just like a really interesting chess piece, because it's like, how do you match up with him, right? Because do you want to put a 200-pound or less, and oftentimes less DB on him and give him a 45-pound advantage?
Right.
Or do you want to put a linebacker on him that's just going to run away? So he kind of strikes me as like an Evan Ingram, or actually, here's an even better one. Juwan Jennings, right? Juwan Jennings, San Francisco. He's going to show up like 3 times a game, but it's going to be the 3 times that absolutely gut the defense, where it's like, God, like just, we had him. We were on 3rd and 8. We had him. They were getting off the field, and then, oh, here comes Higgins, right? But he's a fascinating guy to me, because he's not a receiver and he's not a tight end, but he's kind of both at the same time. And I don't really know what to do with him, because he has a very specific role. And I think that specific role is, again, 3 times a game.
Right.
Just be annoying. and then we'll let the rest of the offense kind of pick up where you left off.
Yeah. Yeah. That was working pretty well down the stretch last year. The coaches were surprised at how tenacious he was blocking, too. He's got the good frame. Of course, when you're giving up pounds like he is to defensive ends and the like, but the effort was there and the technique started to come. So, but given that Tip Reiman's there now, I mean, I think you're going to see 13 personnel from us more often than not, I think, because of those 3. Might be a really interesting scenario for the Cardinals this year with those 3 kids. So
if I was Drew Petzing, I would use him like Sean McVay used Ben Skoranek.
Oh yeah. Oh, good analogy. Yeah.
Like, honestly, like half receiver, half fullback. Like that's what he should do.
Yeah. Absolutely. All right, let's flip over to the defense. In light of the loss of BJ Ojulari, and that really was difficult because he was the defensive all-star in camp so far, and looking all, everything we would hope he was, going to look like in year 2 to make that jump, So if you're the Cardinals, you're Monty now. How do you compensate for that loss?
You kind of don't with what's on the current roster. They're going to have to figure out if they want to make a move or not. And they might not know until midseason, right? It might be a similar thing to Bears last year, where they made a move for Montez Sweat in like week 7, right? When they were like, oh God, we need an edge rusher. So I would I would hold off for now because we got to see like, okay, maybe we can work this out with Xavier Thomas and Dennis Gardick and we'll survive. But I wouldn't be surprised if they're like 3-4 after week 7 and they're still in this thing.
Right.
I could see them making a move for somebody.
Yep.
I don't know who it would be. Like maybe if this Hassan Reddick thing spills over in Philly, they try to bring him home again and say, "We promise you're going to be an edge rusher this time." So we'll see. But I think that's like a mid-October.
Yeah. Yeah. Think there's any chance they could take a run at Judon?
See, Judon would be really interesting, but he's gonna make him pay for it,
Yeah.
right? And he's gonna make him pay for it before the season starts.
Right.
So that one I'm fascinated by because if they do it, I mean they still could do it,
Right.
but if they do it, I think they're gonna have to do it in the next couple weeks.
Makes you nervous too because he only played in 4 games last year. So
Yeah,
and
yeah.
he's getting older, but I think it was a bicep tear. So, and I think he's fully healthy now. But the Cardinals just extended Zaven Collins. Was that a surprise to you?
Oh, I didn't see that.
Yeah, 2 years. Kyle, can you get the stats on that? I don't have them in front of me. I think it was 2 years, like um, maybe 14 million or something like that.
14 total?
Yeah,
That's not
with
bad.
like 11.5 guaranteed. So
That's not
something
bad. I mean, top of the edge
yeah,
rusher market is like 35.
right.
So if you're getting him, and if it's 14 total, right? So if it's 7 a year,
Yeah,
that's 20% of the top of market. That's
yeah,
pretty good.
yeah, and he's great against the run. His PFF grade was, I think, the highest of anyone on defense.
Yeah,
Um,
he's definitely not, I always use the analogy of a Batman, a Robin.
right.
Batman, no. Is he a Robin? Still probably not, but he's a pretty good Alfred. Like that's always the analogy I use. He's like the third guy that plays a role.
So yeah,
Oh
to
man.
answer your
Well, I loved
question,
it.
so it
Go ahead.
is a 2-year
Yeah,
contract worth $14 million with 11.25 in guarantees.
yeah,
That's pretty good.
yeah. I like it, and
The
I
hope
still wish he was playing Mike. I loved him at Mike.
the,
Um,
the
and
hope is that Darius can become the Batman and BJ's the Robin eventually, right? So
right,
that's a good move.
yeah, okay. Um, what do you think of the tandem of Justin Jones and Bilal Nichols?
Boy, they love their squatty body interior defensive linemen that can play everything from a 5 technique to a 2-eye.
Right,
Again, they're versatile guys. You can move them around. They're not like a true classic shade or a true classic 3 technique or a true classic 5 technique. It's just guys who it's like, okay, we got to get into this front. We need versatile pieces that can move all over. It's not going to be like optimum or optimal role players in each individual spot. But, if we have to respond to emotion and shift the front from left to right or right to left, we have 2 guys that can play 2 spots. So we feel okay with it. Like that's what they're there for, right? Is the ability
right,
to play all over the place without
right,
having to swap different guys on the field after every single play and get caught.
right. Were you uh, were you as high on Darius Robinson as I seem to remember in your podcast you didn't think he'd go that high?
And it wasn't necessarily because I didn't like him as a prospect. More so, I was just looking at how the board was falling.
Yeah,
Uh, and I was like, oh, he might be one of those guys that slips to the top of day 2 just
right,
because you can't find a home for him. But then he ends up being really good, right? Like Buddha back in the day.
right,
Like Buddha, you couldn't tell me that Buddha wasn't one of the 32 best players in his class.
correct.
you just couldn't find a home for him, right? But I like Darius a lot. He's long, he's powerful. He's going to be an immediate asset on early downs against the run because he's just going to beat the hell out of tight ends and tackles that don't have his kind of length.
Right.
As a pass rusher, there is a little bit of stiffness there, but it doesn't mean that he still can't be really successful because the basis for all great pass rushers is length and power. And if you have that, you can figure the rest out. So I think overall, he's got a bright future ahead of him. They just have to figure out how to maximize his tools.
Yep. We had a nice surprise last year with Dante Stills, taken, I think he was our last draft pick, and he played well for us, Brett, particularly as a pass rusher. What do you think of him from West Virginia?
I was a huge Dante Stills guy. First saw him at the Shrine Bowl, interviewed him there. He's a great dude. Love him.
Yeah,
And he's another one of these versatile pieces where he can line up wide as an edge, or you could play 5 technique for you. You could even kick him inside a 3 technique. Not the same builder skill set as like a Michael Bennett, but in terms of how he was used back in the day in Seattle, where again, theme of the day, moved all over depending on the packages we're rolling out there. Stills is another one of those. I love his versatility. He's got great power. Motor never quits. Doesn't have a ton of length, so he's not like Darius in that regard. Like he's kind of got to fight people in a phone booth in
right.
order to get home. But once he gets into your chest, he's got unreal power. And that's the thing is like when he's in, you're going to get taken for a ride. So you better not let him into your chest. But I
Yeah,
like him a lot. He's a good player.
excellent. Xavier Thomas. Uh, how close is he to a BJ Ojulari?
Flamethrower off the edge. He's got tons of tools.
Yep,
He fell for reasons that were not related to him being a good football player,
right.
but he is a really good football player. So if anybody in this rotation is going to step up and approximate what BJ Ojulari could have given them talent wise, it's him. I think Gardeck is probably going to be first in line to start just because he's
Yes.
been there and he's been reliable.
Yep.
But as far as who I think has more juice and more potential to have just kind of an out of nowhere breakout season for a day 3 rookie, it's going to be him.
Excellent. How about the 2 kids in the middle for the Cardinals? Kaiser White, and then they got Mac Wilson Sr. from the Patriots.
I like Kaiser White. I've always been a fan of him. I see him as like a diet Drew Tranquil. If we're going to compare him to anybody. Mac Wilson, I've always felt he had better special teams value than anything else. And if anything, he's going to be a huge contributor in the new kickoff structure
Yeah,
on kickoff cover units.
yeah,
Um, I still think they're looking for an absolute killer, do it all inside linebacker. And I
yeah.
feel like they've been looking for that forever. Like,
Right,
right? Last one they had that I can remember, probably what, Daryl Washington,
right.
like 12 years ago.
Yeah, and
And
maybe Deion Buchanan for 1 year.
yeah, and I mean, Steve Keim was drafting one every year trying to find a new one, and they
Right,
still never did.
right.
But yeah, it's continued to be a weakness on the roster, no matter how many resources they pour into it. And I think that's what's kind of frustrating about it.
Yeah, it is. And I mean, at least this regime, I think, is a little more in tune with 34 prototypes. I mean, Steve Keim would draft good defensive players, but then try to, cookie cutter them into spots where they weren't all that familiar coming in, like Isaiah Simmons. Um, that every great athlete he would draft, he'd want to put in that weak inside linebacker spot, like he did with Hassan Reddick. But what you learn is that spot takes so much instinct to run properly. You have to be kind of a well-versed inside linebacker to play it properly. And, would it taken anyone more time to try to learn that. And of course, it's too bad we wasted 3 years of Hassan Reddick
I
without having him on the edge.
if they kept Hassan Reddick at edge from the very start of his
Yeah,
career,
yeah,
I mean, the most sacks in franchise history is Chandler Jones. He wasn't even there that long,
right.
right? And
Yep,
then it's like Calais Campbell, Simeon Rice, like he would have been top 5 in sacks in franchise history, if
right,
not the all-time sack leader by now. If
right.
they just put him at edge from the start. It still pisses me off to this day
Me
that they
too.
didn't.
Yep, me too. All right. So one of the things we're pretty excited about is the infusion of youth that we now have at the cornerback position. With they had Sean Murphy Bunting coming in on a free agent deal. Um, let's start with him. I know you guys were a little skeptical about that. But what do you think the prospects are for him as a CB1?
He's got size, he's got length, he's got physicality, and I
Yep,
think that's kind of what they wanted from him is somebody who could stack up against the bigger physical receivers in this division, right? Because you got to deal with DK Metcalf.
right.
You got to deal with both of the guys in LA because Cooper
Yes,
Kupp is not small and Puka Nacua is not small.
right.
So you got to deal with the size in LA. You got to deal with all of the physicality you're going to get from San Francisco.
Correct.
So like it's a big boy division. You need big boys,
Right,
and he's it, right?
right,
So he's going to start for them just because he gives them that element. And then I think I'm most fascinated to see what's going to happen with the other two spots when
right,
they're in nickel between Max Melton, Garrett Williams,
right.
and keep an eye on like Elijah Jones. Elijah Jones is a really good football player coming out.
Yep.
So they have a lot of options there. This is probably the deepest corner group they've had in quite some time, probably since what, 2015-ish, maybe?
Um, I think even better than 2015. Particularly beyond the first two. I mean, the depth. I mean, amazingly, Brett, um, during Steve Keim's 10 years, he only drafted like 3 cornerbacks. And we were always looking for a guy opposite Peterson and never got one. I mean, Brandon Williams had played 1 year at cornerback. He was the highest picked cornerback Steve Keim drafted in a third round out of Texas A&M. Had been converted from running back to cornerback and had only played there 1 year. And that was a bust. Justin Bethel was great special teams, but struggled to earn playing time. And there were a couple other obscure ones, but he never really addressed the cornerback position in the draft. He instead kept trying to sign guys like Cromartie and such, as 1 year deal guys who actually played pretty well for a year, but then they signed with somebody else. So it was
Yeah.
frustrating. But yeah, so we're really excited. The guy that I like a lot too that seems to be losing favor, and I can't figure it out because last year, Catrell Clark, I thought was playing really well, and then came the Rams game, and the coaches put him on Cup, and Cup had caught a bomb on one of the first plays, man to man. Catrell had zero help. And Tratrell was draped all over him, stride for stride, but the pass from Stafford was an absolute dime, dropped in the bucket. Cup caught it, and Catrell immediately took him down. But I can't fault him kind of for that effort. And then he scored on an out pass in the red zone. Cup did on Catrell, when the Cardinals had no linebacker lined up to protect the slant. There's no one there. So Catrell shaded him to the inside. I think he had to. And it was one of those wink, wink, patented.
Yeah, you're toast. It's just throwing with leverage at that point. Like there's nothing you could do.
Right. I don't know if any cornerback can do both. Is protect the inside leverage and then and then protect a timing pass where Stafford throws to the pylon before Kupp even breaks. So and then so they bench him for 3 games, and in favor of Starling Thomas V, who played hard and he's a young player with some upside. But they finally bring him back, and lo and behold, it's against the Rams again. He leads the team in tackles with 9. He's balling his butt off. He gives up 2 passes and 5 targets for like 8 yards. And I'm saying, wow, what a response. This is awesome. Except then they bench him the next 3 games. I just couldn't.
They only play him against the Rams, huh?
I know, right? And this time, talk about atoning for himself. Not that I think he had anything to atone for when you put him ISO on a guy like an MVP candidate like Cooper Kupp. But I know if I'm correct, I remember you 2 years ago featuring Catrell Clark on your video, and you were as high on him as I was. Was that correct?
I loved him coming out.
Yep.
In his draft class, he was one of my favorite picks the Cardinals made that year.
Yeah.
Great kid. I thought one of the better nickel prospects in his class, which I think was 2 drafts ago. And I always thought that was kind of his natural spot, was nickel, right? Because he's a great tackler. He's not super big, so I didn't really want him being outside. But I thought, okay, if you're playing him inside where he could just be like a feisty Brandon Boykin type nickel, like I thought that was a good fit. Yeah. The hard part for him, though, is that Arizona now has like 5 of those guys.
I know.
So he's competing with Star Thomas. He's competing with Elijah Jones. He's competing with Garrett Williams. He's competing with one of my favorites from this year's class, Adrian Taylor Demerson, who I think is going to be a phenomenal player.
Yes.
So it's like, where's the spot?
I know.
It's just tough.
Yep. Yeah. Well, maybe if they can get some trade value for him, just someone who's as keen on him as we are, because and this upsets me because I do love the kid, and I thought he brought some real juice. Plays with a passion, and that second round game, Brett, I had my doubts about him as a tackler. He balled in that game. He came up and stuck people, and it just showed. It was like, welcome back to the field. He was so eager to do whatever it took, and I love when guys get like that, like in a kind of ball mode, Buddha-esque. And speaking of Buddha and Jalen Thompson, what do you think of the tandem there?
It's a great safety duo, but I would even say it's a great safety trio if you're also throwing in Adrian Taylor Demerson. This is a group that can, again, if the theme of the day is flexibility, both Buddha and Jalen can play the run depth. They can play in the post area. They can cover in space. When they got to be 10 yards off a guy and he's got 2-way goes, like they can both do it. And then you got Rabbit Taylor Demerson, who is, he compares himself when he was coming out. I talked to him at Shrine Bowl. Compared himself to Jalen Petre coming out of Baylor. And he loves how Petre plays, but I think he's an even better version of it.
Wow.
Yeah. I don't know how he's done in camp. I haven't checked up on camp reports, but if we're talking about range, ball skills, toughness, tackling ability, man cover ability, like this kid's it, man. He's it. And he's gonna get playing time. I don't know how, but he will, because you can't keep him off the field. I know he's their third safety now, but they're gonna figure it out. They're gonna get him out there somehow. And once they do, it's gonna be tough to get him off.
Yeah, maybe they run like a, you know, one of those like umbrellas with three safeties. What do, what's the guy from TCU? How he ran that?
Oh, Gary Patterson.
Patterson
Yeah, yeah.
was like a 5-2-4 or something.
They ran wild stuff down there.
Or it was a 2-5-4. It
Yeah,
was
yeah.
like wild. Um, but I think you're right. I think that's coming. And the thing that I like about the Rabbit too is that he's right now the best we've got him on the back end. We've really struggled back there. I mean, neither Jalen nor Buddha has been great as a center fielder. Um, and getting the balls deep. We got torched so many times last year. And like on the first play in the beginning of second halves, which was really frustrating. But so I'm hoping that he can help us there. But also him playing the slot, like you said, watching him at Texas Tech in the slot, looked like a man. Um, Handled it, with such aplomb and aggressive smarts. So yeah, I was really excited. He lasted into the fourth round. I was mocking him in the third when I knew we had multiple picks. I was hoping we could get him there, and the fact that we got him in the fourth is pretty cool. So
He's a great kid. And he was one of the ones where, I heard from folks at the Shrine Bowl that once teams got out of the interview room with him, they're like, "Oh my God, we need him on the team."
oh great,
He's,
wow,
he's that kind of kid.
yeah, he's a character, no doubt about it. Do you know anything about Joey Blunt?
I haven't really watched a whole lot of him. I could put in a call to my buddy that was at that program that can give me
Yeah,
some insight. I never really watched him coming out.
right.
And I haven't really paid attention to him much since because I think he got there in 23, right?
Yeah, he was with the Seahawks briefly, and what happened for us last year when we picked him up, he's played in the ACC at Virginia. Um, was virtually every time he's on the field, there's a turnover. He's like Johnny on the spot. He was a you know great gunner on special teams, getting to the ball and knocking it out. Made the game sealing interception in Philly in the end zone on the upset there. Just seems like every time he touched the field, he's such a good athlete too. He's got length and speed and range. Um, and then he's a hitter, deluxe. He really caught my eye and kind of a sleeper. But I don't know where he stands with Andre Chachere, um, being back there, who has been familiar with JG. And he was pretty decent. He too didn't defend over the top, but he was good in the intermediate areas. And then so there's a possibility there that I don't even know if Blunt makes the team. But special teams wise, I would keep him in a heartbeat. But Blunt did look like he had the instincts to play on the back end, and that's my biggest concern. Coverage wise is like you said, we suddenly have like 4 or 5 kids who can play the slot. We've never had that, Brett. Never. I mean, that's why Tyler Lockett has owned the Cardinals for the
Yeah.
last 7 years. I mean, it's been one game after the next. You just can't cover them. And I was begging every year. I wanted Brian Branch last year. Was begging
Oh,
for him.
yeah.
I wanted Trent McDuffie the year before. And people were like, they're smallish guys who can't. I said, no, they play the slot and they're lights out in the slot. And we just keep getting torched by Cup and Lockett and Debo. And now Ayuk has been a pest. when they kind of put him
We
in.
think a franchise that has a history of amazing slot receivers would understand the value of stopping slot receivers.
You would think, right?
Like,
I
oh, we've
know.
had like four guys in the last 15 years straight be great slot receivers for us. We should probably do something to stop them.
Yeah, I know. So, and then we're pretty excited about getting our special teams back with Matt Prater. Blake Gillikin was really good for us. He was quite a surprise as a punter last year, and I was worried we'd lose him. But we re-signed him, I think, to a 2-year deal, so that was good. And our long snapper Aaron Brewer is really good. So, my last question to you about the team in general is: how are the Cardinals going to match up defensively versus McVay, Shanahan, and now Ryan Grubb, who I think could hit the league by storm up there in Seattle if things go right? And I think he's got the right quarterback to do it. But how are the Cardinals? How can they contend defensively and prepare defensively? Because we went 0-6 in the NFC West last year. Like you said, they did a lot with little, but also, I mean, the point differential, Brett, was like 100. I mean, getting whacked in virtually every game. How are they going to turn that around this year?
I think they match up better with Seattle than they do with the other two.
Yeah,
I'll start with them. I think Grubb, you're going to get spread out a lot against him. He's going to try to do some formation into boundary stuff to get what your checks are, and then he's going to poke and prod you with, they call it FIB. So again, if you're putting the strength of the formation into the boundary side and then basically leaving the field side wide open, that you did that a lot at Washington, like
right.
20% of the time, which is a massive number. I think the NFL average was like 6%. So he's going to do that a lot. He's going to test you and see what your checks are, and then he's going to call something out of that to exploit those checks. So they need to be aware of that and have a lot of FIB checks. But they have the talent, I think, to match up with Seattle as far as the Cardinals defense versus the Seahawks offense. I oddly enough, I think they have enough good matchups there for them. The
Good.
problem is the Rams and the 49ers, and
Yep.
especially the Rams.
Yep.
I think the Cardinals are going to be sneaky good. I want to preface this by saying I think they compete for a 7 seed. I honestly believe that. They do not match up with the Rams.
Right.
It's not going to be good. If you're looking at the weight, the tonnage of that Rams offensive line when they're healthy, especially the interior trio, the Cardinals do not have the tonnage on defense to stand up to that. And this is a team that runs duo 40% of the time.
Yep.
Going to run. And I'm sorry, because you're white and Mac Wilson, I don't see them stopping that. Going up against 330-pound guards, 25 game. It's just it's a bad matchup. It just is. So the idea is get the 7 seed, hope to God the Packers pick off the Rams, and then you can deal with the Packers in the second round. But that is the one team that they are not built for.
Right. Yeah, that's a big worry. I mean, all the motions, what was really frustrating for me is, and I've been studying how to try to counter a McVay offense, and the best one I've seen to do it was Brian Flores, as I was explaining to you. We were talking about Van Ginkel, where he used his edges in such a way that he wouldn't, he wouldn't give up contain, and he wouldn't give up backside runs, for one, off of the main staple off tackle play where they block it down, but then the running back can at any moment cut it back. They really played discipline on the edges there, and they contained it in ways I hadn't seen before. And Flores had that year was really hot against the NFC West.
Mm-hmm.
He was dialing up. He came up with a brilliant fourth quarter solution for Kyler, but then the rest of the league copycatted by basically flexing his edges there and not letting Kyler break contain and hemming him inside. And they came back and won with Tua's first or second start in that game. It was very frustrating because we had a good lead, but Flores was just so innovative with this kind of stuff but I mean, you have to get innovative with McVay because there's just so much. You got to take away the bread and butter off tackle play. That's to start with. And I felt last year that, I mean, Kyron Williams was just running through us like nothing. But just the way that the Cardinals defense lined up against it, I knew McVay must have been licking his chops. It just didn't look to me like they were prepared for it. And lo and behold, McVay goes on a morning talk show and is laughing the next day about how easy it was to run all of his basic plays. Very frustrating to me. And there's one thing about being physically outmanned, but there's also, you can see guys when they're well coached. I mean, when they're doing the right things, but they can't physically hold up, but they're coached to do the right things. That's been my worry. Because I saw innovative blitz plans from the Cardinals defense, and some trickery, and I was intrigued with that. But in terms of basic, defensive game planning against like a McVay and a Shanahan, it seemed very lacking to me. And it was disappointing to me that, in our own division, even Mike McDonald hires Leslie Frazier, which I think is huge for them. And then Marvin Lewis, who lives in Arizona, who I think would have been perfect to be an advisor, goes to the Raiders. I mean, what can you say about, do these guys have enough experience in Gannon and Rallis to be able to match wits with those two in particular?
I do think that Gannon and Rallis are very good coaches. The thing is, again, they're still young. They're young in their
right
journey, I guess you could say. And unfortunately for them, they are in the same division as two of the top 10 best offensive coaches in the history of the sport that happen to be in the same division at the same time.
Right.
And that's tough. I do wish that they would have brought in Marvin Lewis as a comparative big gun, because Marvin is a legendary defensive coach in his own right, and it has been massively influential in the game of football going back to the 80s. That would have been great. Problem is Marvin Lewis ain't cheap. So it's possible they got outbid a little bit there if they even tried. But I do like Gannon and Rallis. Like I want to say that because it's important to say that they are good coaches. They're very good at what they do. Okay. They just happen to be in the same division as two of literally the best ever, and that's a tough thing.
Right. Yeah. Now, just peeking ahead, if they show that they can hang with those guys, and the record stays the same, would Mike Vrabel be a better choice?
Are you talking like for the head coach job?
Yep.
I mean, I think Mike Vrabel
is who could try to match wits with those guys.
I think Vrabel in general is a great coach, and I think Vrabel will be great for any organization. I'm still not ready. After 2 years, I still wouldn't be ready to give up on Gannon just because I saw so much buy-in in the locker room, and the locker room seems to genuinely like playing for him. So like the wheels would have to completely fall off for me to even consider it.
Yeah.
Or like Belichick would have to be available or something,
Right.
like something like that. But I still have a lot of confidence in Gannon. I really do.
Good. That's good to know. And because in my mind, if you're going to have a defensive minded head coach, he's got to bring the special to defense. You know, the way that D'Amico Ryans is doing in Houston. I mean, he won with little. Their defensive personnel last year coming out of the draft even was on a par with the Cardinals. And look what he did with that group. Pretty amazing, to have total envy there. And he's your guy, man. You're a Texans fan. I mean, you must be thrilled with him.
I mean, he's a rare coach,
Yeah.
and he just like just talk about Sean McVay. He just like Sean McVay is a rare coach in the sense that he is equally good as a schematic wizard as he is a motivator of men, and that is so not normal.
Yep.
And the reason why most head coaches, get eaten alive by the McVays, the Shanahans, the Harbaughs, of the world is because most guys are not like that. Most guys are not that specific mix of innovator plus motivator.
Right.
And when you get one, you hold on to them forever. So hopefully the Texans hold on to D'Amico forever.
Yes. Well, I think it's a forever thing. I mean, he played for y'all and he was a star. And now the charisma, but he's got the the instincts, the X's and O's down too. I mean, you're right. It's a rare combination. Boy, did he hit the ground running, and it's so great for the Texans who've been down and out for so long. What was amazing to me is that how ESPN does that futures power rankings for the next 3 years.
Yeah.
Like he blew them out of the water because they were like last year ranked for all their categories: a quarterback, roster, GM, coach, head coach. They had them ranked like all in the late 20s, same as the Cardinals. And now this year, I don't know if you noticed,
Everybody's picking them to win the damn Super Bowl, and
they're all in the top 10. So
roster's not that
rankings,
different, guys. Like
right.
you weren't paying attention. That's why I think it's not going to surprise me, but I liken it a lot to the Cardinals, where it's like the roster's not that different. People just weren't paying attention.
Yeah. Oh, well, that's really exciting. So, just want to end it on this: is that you captured my imagination so well. When I don't know, a couple weeks ago, I'm reading through X, and you come up with some dandies every now and then, and I just want to get your reaction on this one because a Brett Kollmann tweet comes through saying that right about now, even with little emotional interest, I wouldn't mind watching an Arizona Cardinals Carolina Panthers game.
Yes. Man wishes for the weirdest things in the middle of June, where the only thing we can watch is baseball.
Yep. Oh man, that felt really good. But but I think you're getting a little emotionally attached to the Cardinals.
They're a fun team to watch. They really are. Again, they don't always win.
No.
And this year they definitely didn't win a lot, but you can't say they're not good television.
Right.
Those are my favorite kinds of teams. The one that do fun things on offense and score a lot of points and then give up a lot of points back the other way. Those are my favorite teams to watch.
Yeah,
Wow,
you can't tell me, like Cardinals fans can't tell me that they didn't have a blast watching the Giants game because it was the best possible result, right? You score a lot of points and you look at least competent, but you still lose, so your draft pick was better.
Oh God. Oh, and it was so that early in the season. I mean, as it turned out, Brett, we could have this Cardinals team, if they had settled the quarterback situation prior to camp and realized that Colt McCoy was on his last legs and last arm, and gotten a guy in there like Dobbs from the start even, and not rush him in with 2 weeks before the regular season, the Cardinals could have been 3-0 because
Oh,
they had
absolutely.
the Commanders on the ropes on the road, and then Dobbs fumbled the ball twice in the second half. And then, of course, they beat Dallas, and they had the Giants down. What was it? 20?
It
What
was
was
like
it? 20 nothing.
21. Yeah. And that's why I think like last year was the best possible result. I know this is going to sound awful. Last year was the best possible result, right? You show competency and you show that the roster is bought in and that they're playing hard for the coach and the culture is being established. But you still get Marvin Harrison Jr. because you don't win. And now you come into 2024. We know the culture is good. We know the head coach is good. We know the roster, just based on watching them with our own eyes last year, like has talent. Like they showed competency. They beat the freaking Cowboys. So we know it's there.
Right.
But you get all that plus Darius, plus Marvin, plus all these DBs they've drafted, plus Benson. Monty cooked in the offseason. So like you know what they're capable of, but you still had a quote unquote bad enough season when you didn't even have your starting quarterback till week 10 that you end up with high value assets where you can go, if not worst to first, at least worst to playoffs. It's not unheard of. Houston just did it. So
Right.
like if anything, I'd be stoked as a Cardinals fan because last year was the best possible year you could have had. Like it's not like you were going to win the Super Bowl last year. You weren't going to go to the championship. You might as well be entertaining and still have a good pick.
Yeah. The question that I have about that is that were guys bought in or were they playing for jobs? Bought in.
Hey man, playing hard's playing hard. I'll take it
Right.
anyway.
Right. Right. And hopefully this year, things are, that the question of that will become clear. And then, because for much of the year, what the Cardinals did on defense was unacceptable by any standard. And for a defensive minded head coach, what stuck in my craw too was that after games, Gannon was, like looked unfazed. Like he expected them to lose and was just trying to be upbeat about the things they did do well, and didn't look distressed upon losing. And that kind of bothered me, particularly when he's like the laziest game coach I've ever seen. I mean, he just stands there on the sideline. Meanwhile, McVay's going through 3 packs of gum, pacing back and forth. So is Pete Carroll, and Gannon's standing there like a statue.
I will say this. I was just at Rams practice yesterday, and McVay standing 10 feet away from him while coaching. He is a psycho.
Yeah.
I love him. And he is psycho in a good way, but he's a
Right.
psycho. He's not wired like a normal person.
Yeah. Well, NFL head coaches, I guess, there's no necessarily right way or wrong way. But, I love the guys that get you fired up. That's for sure. And the guys whose heads are so completely in the game, and you just know they're working their butts off. So all these things, questions that I hope will be answered this year, so that we know, I know for sure that it wasn't just guys playing for contracts, because, all of them were given the message that you're either on board with us or you'll be gone. I mean, they were cutting guys left and right, trading Isaiah Simmons for a 7th rounder, just handing, Myjai Sanders off, cutting him, 3rd round pick. It was hard to follow and hard to accept at times. And the thing that bothers me too, and I just want to ask you this, is the integrity. I mean, I feel like I know now why they wouldn't want to hire Brian Flores, who in my mind was way more qualified than Gannon for the job, because you already know he's not going to want to tank. And while I understand your point about, I get it. Like, if you're going to lose, how about, hitting the lottery in the draft? I totally get that. But at the same time, how do you look the men who are playing for you in the eyes, who are laying it out for you on that field and coming in, licking their wounds in the eyes and say, hey, well, at least we'll get a good draft pick next year?
Well, I don't necessarily think Gannon was thinking that, and I don't think anybody in the building was thinking that. But definitely, I think the fans and the media were thinking that. I genuinely think everybody in the building was trying to win. Like, if they weren't trying to win, they wouldn't beat the Cowboys. And watching that tape, like, I saw guys playing hard.
Yeah.
And if there's one thing I've come to know, being around NFL buildings, is that players can smell a fraud a mile away, and they don't play that hard for somebody who they think is a fraud. And I would directly compare the Raiders last year in the Josh McDaniels part of the year to how the Cardinals were playing, and they look like completely different organizations. I would even say the Chargers under Staley look like completely different organizations compared to the Cardinals, under Gannon. And they ended up picking in a similar range, but the teams looked very different to me. So I don't think the team was trying to tank. I think that was their best effort. Their best effort just produced, 4 wins or whatever it was. I'm just saying, from a fan's perspective and from a media perspective, if I'm being callous about it, I want a good game that's watchable while also them getting Marvin Harrison Jr. So I think it's just two different perspectives. I don't think anybody in the building was trying to tank, though.
All right. Thank you. So, that's, I got to figure this out, because it's been really bothering me, that part of it. Because, well, here's the other thing, was that I saw guys on defense playing hard, but not smart. And Gannon's mantra coming in was, violent, aggressive, smart. And, so many blown assignments, so many, at times it was just pitch and catch for any team, not tight coverage, a lot of soft zones. And on defense, I've never seen anything like this. Players coming in like in hockey shifts. And it was uncanny to me. I watched the games with a really close friend of mine, and I said to her, watch, when Dennis Gardeck makes a big play, they're going to take him right out of the game. And every time she was like, oh my God, they did. And what, WTF, sorry. Like, if you're wanting to win a game and you got a player that's hot and he just made a big play, why do you take him off the field? It's like decisions like, it just made me, and you saw the end of their last game, Prater missing those 2 field goals.
Yeah.
That looked so orchestrated to me, and planned. Like the first one, nobody came near him like normally you would do. And he did this exaggerated, like, like, ooh, little body motion I've never seen him do.
Back and watch it, because I got to see if there's maybe a problem with the snap or something.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and I just wanted to beat the season. I just didn't want to go 0-6 in the NFC West. That meant more to me, and I think we still would have gotten Marvin Harrison Jr. at 5. That would have meant more to me than, and then beating Pete Carroll on his way out the door would have meant a lot to me too, because of all the times with him. So sweet when we did manage to beat him, but it was tough to see these kind of things playing out in certain games. Now, here's the thing, and I'll wrap it up with this, but there were circle games for sure on the schedule where they really played harder. That Dallas game was big at home to try to show fans that, we can do something. That was huge. They played a really good game. The Philly game late, let's be honest. I mean, everyone wanted to see them win that, because of this, the Gannon situation. Pretty much everyone. And I think they came that game to play. So there were certain games where they came and it looked like they really wanted to win and they were coaching to win. Whereas in some other games, you just wondered, so I do understand that, like the fans do, that they were wanting Marvin Harrison Jr. And I do understand that. And he's been looking the total part. I was worried about the unique way he was handling the draft process. I was worried he might elect not to sign with the Cardinals because he didn't have an agent, and this is the Cardinals we're talking about, would he be interested in playing here? Since then, he's been fantastic. Still have the jersey thing. I just wonder if it was worth it to tank for a certain player, and if it's ever worth it to do that. And I also wonder why.
Well, if he puts up 1,400 as a rookie, I guess we'll circle back to that after this season.
Exactly, and I think if you had a do-over for the Cardinals, would you take Will Anderson Jr.?
Oh yeah,
yeah,
of course.
Why didn't and here we are with one of the least impressive set of edge rushers in the league. That almost feels like karma. Now, you
when you have the blue chipper on the board, you take the blue.
Yeah. So, but yeah, I'll look forward to that 1,400 yards. That'll have me totally on board. So, and if we're in the hunt for the 7 seed, it's going to be fantastic. I mean, but I appreciate it. I was surprised a little bit that your thought about Kyler in year 2 with Petzing wasn't more geared on opening things up, based on kind of the stuff you were talking about in your podcast. But now, in retrospect, now that you say it, why not just build on the things you were doing well and add to it as you go? Makes a lot of sense to me, and so I appreciate that. Yeah, so your final thoughts on your Arizona Cardinals?
I think this is going to be a very fun team to watch. I think they're going to be solidly in the middle tier of the NFC, which can still make the playoffs. Obviously, I don't think they're going to be bad. I think they're out of those depths of despair. Yep. The thing is just getting over the hump to being consistent enough to get a wild card this year. Like that's all they need. They need consistency. Their biggest problem last year was corner. They addressed that hard, and I think they've made strides to fix that. So it's a young secondary, but if they get better play out of that this year, and Kyler's healthy, and Marvin is doing Marvin things, and the run game is still good, like this could very easily be like a 9-win team that's a 7 seed. They're giving Cardinals fans something to be excited about. And who knows? Once you're in January, anything can happen. But I think that is possible. It's also possible that again they're young secondary. They stumble a little bit. They end up at 6 or 7. They just miss it, and they become like the new Lions, where it's like close but no cigar, and then you make the big leap in 2025. But either way, no matter what, things are trending up significantly, and Cardinals fans should be excited.
Well, as someone like yourself who's a lifelong Texans fan, that those are encouraging words, and I know everyone's excited to hear you say that. And we were so excited to have you here again today to discuss the Cardinals, and your handle of the Cardinals, I think, is outstanding, and as is EJ's. That podcast was fantastic, and as I said to Cardinal fans, if you haven't seen it, get on there and watch it. It's fantastic. What was it filmed in your apartment in LA or?
Yeah, it was filmed at my place.
Yeah, yeah. I was just getting used to the one in Chicago, right? Didn't you have one in Chicago?
I was kind of, let's see, I was about 40 miles east before, um, and right in the middle of wildfire territory. So me and my wife were like, we should probably get out of
Ooh.
here. So
Oh,
moved to LA, and now we're moving again, in a couple weeks. So
oh, you are?
yeah, it's constantly on the move. Now we're going a little bit closer to the coast because, get a little bit cooler temperatures.
Oh, great. What time are you going?
Like right a couple weeks from now, like right in the middle of preseason. So, chose a great time to move, of course.
Wow. Oh, this is great. Well, we wish you the best, and thanks so much for taking the time to hang out with us today. And man, anything else coming up on your schedule that we ought to look for?
Well, I would mention it, but I feel like it's gonna piss off Cardinals fans. I'm doing a video on the 2008 Steelers, so maybe avert your eyes on that one.
Oh, of all teams. Yeah, we'll just miss the last part. All right, settle it for Cardinal fans. Were Antonio Holmes both feet in the end zone?
Oh man. Only because I'm going to Pittsburgh in 3 weeks and I don't want to get guns down while I'm there. I'm going to say yes. But I reserve the right to revise my answer before I come to Phoenix the next time.
Excellent. Perfectly handled. That was such diplomacy and tact. Brett, thanks so much for joining us. And whenever you're here, we get tons of ratings. So we really appreciate it. And we wish you a great season, and we'll talk soon.
Thank you for having me.
All right. So for Kyle Little Rock Ledbetter, thanks to him, and thanks to all of you for tuning in for the for this episode of Red Rain, and may the Super Bowl confetti of red rain shower down on you into the red sea. Red rain.